The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint ozone smell of an overheating laptop. Your finger hovers over a notification, twitching before you even consciously decide to tap. That split-second hesitation, that micro battle you just lost. Your grandfather didn't have it, and it's not because he had more willpower. It's because his brain was wired for a world that didn't attack his prefrontal cortex every 12 seconds. If you've ever lain awake at 2 a.m., brain buzzing with the ghost of 1,000 scrolls, promising yourself tomorrow will be different, only to wake up and immediately grab your phone, you know that hollow shame. You've likely blamed yourself, called it weak discipline, a character flaw. But the data tells a different story. It's a story of biological mismatch, a neurological betrayal. Let's start with a simple question. How did we get here? To answer it, we have to travel back to a small room at Stanford University in the late 1960s. A researcher named Walter Mischel placed a single marshmallow in front of a 4-year-old. He gave them a choice. Eat it now or wait 15 minutes and get 2. A simple test of self-control. In 1968, roughly 2/3 of those children were able to wait the full 15 minutes. They used strategies. They covered their eyes. They sang songs. They turned their tiny bodies away from the treat to resist the immediate pull of its sugar-coated reward promise. Now, fast forward to the early 1990s. A team of researchers in New Zealand replicated the exact experiment. White lab coats, same instructions, same 15-minute clock. The children in 1990s Aotearoa averaged just over 6 minutes of waiting. The 1960s children had averaged 12. A 50% reduction in the ability to delay gratification in a single generation. Think about that. The same test, the same age group, the same biological hardware. But the output had been fundamentally rewired. If that 50% drop caught you off guard, you're not alone. Subscribe to stay on this investigation, because what rewired those children's brains is still rewiring yours right now. And drop a comment, marshmallow, if that generational shift hit you personally. This is where we have to pause and look at the mechanism, because the neuroscientists were tracking it. Mischel's original cohort was scanned decades later. The fMRI footage shows something stark. The children who waited longest in the 1960s showed strong activation in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's braking system. The orbitofrontal cortex, which assigns value to immediate rewards, was actively suppressed. They were neurologically choosing the long-term outcome. But the modern cohorts, the scans show a different pattern. The amygdala, your ancient threat and desire detector, lights up like a fire alarm. The ventral striatum, your dopamine reward center, screams for the immediate hit. The prefrontal cortex flickers weakly, outgunned. The modern brain is treating a marshmallow not as a test of will, but as a survival signal it must grab now. Before we go deeper, ask yourself, how many times today did you feel that internal tug of war? That magnetic pull toward a cheap dopamine hit, a notification, a snack, a clickbait headline, while your rational brain whispered, not yet, wait, focus. That internal tug isn't random. It's the signature of a hijacked reward circuit, and it's getting weaker by the year. Let's quantify that weakening. In 2022, a meta-analysis of 112 studies covering over 215,000 people born across 8 decades dropped the hammer. The researchers charted a U-shaped curve of self-control across a lifetime. Peak performance hits between ages 30 and 45. That makes evolutionary sense. You need peak discipline to raise children, manage resources, lead the tribe. But the curve had a dirty secret. For cohorts born after 1990, the curve was significantly lower at every age, a Cohen's d of negative 0.38. In plain English, that means the average person born in 1995 has less self-control at age 30 than their grandparent had at age 20. Think about this. Your grandmother was likely raising kids, managing a household, and working with less than a quarter of the choices and distractions you face today. She didn't need a productivity app. She had an environment that supported her prefrontal cortex. You have an environment built by the world's best behavioral engineers to demolish yours. Here's the part nobody talks about. The mechanism isn't just the smartphone. The smartphone is the final assassin. The real damage started decades earlier, in the water supply of modern life. Elevated cortisol. Kudielka's 2020 meta-analysis of 2,517 subjects showed that high basal cortisol directly predicts a 12% drop in performance on self-controlled tasks. The Stroop test, the go-ka-no-go task, the delayed discounting game. Cortisol hammers the same brain regions you need to say no. Now ask yourself, what raised cortisol levels across the 20th century? Processed sugar spikes, chronic sleep deprivation, incessant noise pollution, the rise of hurry sickness. The 2018 WHO survey showed sugary drink consumption among adolescents shot up from 23% to 38% between 2003 and 2017. Each spike dumps glucose into your system, which triggers an insulin response, which triggers cortisol release. You're not just losing willpower because you're lazy. You're losing it because your neuroendocrine system has been chemically pickled in a stress brine for 40 years. Consider this. In 1995, the median American bought their first home at age 28. By 2021, that number had climbed to 33. A 5-year delay in long-term planning, a measurable increase in delayed gratification failure mapped directly onto the timeline of environmental assault on the prefrontal cortex. Now, here's a detail that stopped me cold. In 2021, neuroscientist William Kelly published a study on delay discounting across 3 American generations. He gave subjects a series of choices. Would you rather have $20 today or $30 in a month? $50 today or $75 in 2 weeks? The classic behavioral economics probe. The results were brutal. Millennials' discount rates were 27% higher than baby boomers, 27% more likely to devalue the future. That's not a personality quirk. That's a measurable cross-generational neural rewiring happening in real time. This isn't a self-help story anymore. It's a neurological audit. Subscribe to stay with the evidence because the next scan will show you exactly where your own wiring stands. And in the comments, tell us, did you grow up with a smartphone or without? 'Cause the data divides along that line. But here's the twist that the self-help gurus won't tell you. When Kelly's team scanned the brains of the low-discount subjects, the boomers who could wait, they saw dense, strong, white matter tracts running from the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex down to the ventral striatum. A superhighway between reason and desire. The high-discount millennials. Their scans showed thinner, weaker tracts with more interference from the amygdala. The hardware was different, not broken, but worn down by a different developmental environment. This is the moment where most people feel the sting of recognition. If you're feeling it, that means your wiring is still plastic. The fact that you just sat through 5 minutes of this, resisting the pull of whatever other tab is open, means your prefrontal cortex is still fighting. The next step is watching the full circuit. You'll see how to recognize the trap before you fall in. Now, let's take this to the ancestral brain. Your ancestors, the ones living in small bands on the savannah, didn't have infinite choices. They had finite, high-stakes decisions. Should I climb this tree for fruit? That requires delayed gratification, 2 hours climbing, 10 minutes of eating. But the reward is calories. Should I chase this gazelle? 3 hours of running, 1 hour of eating. The brain evolved to wait for the bigger payoff because the environment was scarce. The future risk was real. Compare that to the modern ecology of choice. 9 seconds of scrolling, 1 second of dopamine. 0 cost to switch. This is the key that the neuro data reveals. Your brain's reward circuit didn't evolve for an infinite, cheap buffet of options. It evolved for scarcity. When you face 1,000 marshmallows a day, tabs, notifications, ads, streaming selections, your prefrontal cortex doesn't have the neural bandwidth to suppress each one. It fatigues. And here's where the evidence gets concrete in the worst way. In 2022, a team led by Anouk Sherez at Radboud University scanned older adults aged 65 to 75 while they performed a go-no-go task. The results were counterintuitive. The older adults showed stronger dorsolateral prefrontal cortex activation during the self-control test than the 30-year-olds. Beta value of 0.58, highly significant. The older brain had to work harder. No. The older brain was preserved. It had been built in a low distraction era and it could still mount a defense. The younger brain, your brain, showed a weaker signal, as if the braking system had rusted from disuse. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. Your brain isn't broken. It's behaving exactly as it should for an organism swimming in dopamine. The problem is the water, not the fish. When every moment of boredom is met with a slot machine in your pocket, your neural pathways for delaying gratification atrophy. The prefrontal cortex doesn't get exercised. The ventral striatum gets hyperstimulated. The amygdala gets sensitized to novelty. You can train all the discipline you want, but if you're breathing an atmosphere of $20 now for 30 later offers every second, you're swimming upstream. The neurodata proves that willpower is not an infinite resource. It's a muscle. And the modern environment has designed a perfect rehabilitation plan for it. Let's go back to the marshmallow one last time because it contains the whole story. The 1960s children used strategies. They turned away. They distracted themselves. They actively constructed a less tempting environment. The modern children? When given the same experiment, they stared at the treat. They picked it up. They sniffed it. Their environment, the phone, the screen, and the notification bell, had already trained them to hyperfixate on immediate stimuli. They had stopped learning how to look away. The loop isn't your fault. It's your grandfather's ghost in your hardware. But now that you see the circuit, you have the choice to rewire it. Click to install the first neuro hack in the next video and watch your own brain's resistance break down in real time. The data is clear. The path is opened. Your brain already knows how to wait. It just forgot. And that forgetting is not a failure of yours. It's the signature of the world you inherited. The only question left is whether you will start the reclamation. That forgetting is measurable. In 2023, a team at the University of Oregon ran a simple experiment. They asked subjects to sit in a quiet room for 10 minutes with no phone, no book, no stimulation, just their own thoughts. Then they asked them to perform a delayed discounting task. The group that had sat in silence showed a 14% improvement in their ability to wait for larger rewards. A single 10-minute reset, no screens, no interruptions, no notifications. The prefrontal cortex had been given just enough silence to recalibrate its brake pedal. The implications are brutal in their simplicity. Your brain doesn't need more discipline. It needs less noise. The ancestral brain spent 99% of its evolutionary history in environments of profound silence and low stimulus density. The modern brain spends 99% of its waking hours in environments designed to maximize stimulus density. The gap between those two realities is the gap between the 1960s marshmallow score and the 2020s marshmallow score. And it's growing. So here's the final number. The one that should sit in your chest like a cold stone. The Framingham Offspring study tracked 1:231 participants over 20 years. They measured their delayed discounting rate at baseline in 1991, then measured their hippocampal volume in 2011. The result was a correlation coefficient of 0.34, significant. meaning the people who devalued the future most deeply in 1991 had significantly smaller hippocampi 20 years later. The brain's memory hub literally shrank in proportion to the inability to wait. The loss of willpower was not just a behavioral issue, it was a biological one. Measurable, physical, progressive. And the most haunting detail from that study, the rate of decline accelerated after 2005. The year the smartphone went mainstream. The year the infinite scroll became a permanent fixture in the human hand. The data shows a steepening curve, a sudden downward slope in self-controlled scores that aligns perfectly with the rollout of the notification economy. You didn't just inherit a weakened brain. You inherited an accelerating neurological crisis, and the accelerator is still pressed to the floor. That accelerator is still pressed down, and your prefrontal cortex is the one holding the brake. Subscribe to watch the next phase of this investigation. I'll show you how to slowly release that pedal. And in the comments, drop the year you first had a phone. The data shows that year predicts your current self-control score. What does that mean for you, sitting here, reading this, feeling the weight of the evidence settling in? It means the choice is real. Not rhetorical, not deferred. Every time you pick up your phone without a conscious goal, you are training your brain to devalue the future. Every time you sit with the discomfort of boredom instead of scrolling, you are rebuilding the white matter highway between your prefrontal cortex and your reward center. The data is not abstract. It is happening inside your skull right now as you read this sentence. The ancestral brain isn't gone. It's dormant. It spent 2 million years learning to wait for the bigger payoff. It can learn again, but only if you give it the environment it was built for. Silence, scarcity of choice, high stakes, and the courage to sit with your own thoughts without reaching for the next hit of dopamine. That is the only neurohack that ever mattered, and the only one the data truly supports.